The sound of a bullet cracking the still morning air sent a flock of ravens scattering across the amber horizon of Dry Creek, Arizona Territory, 1878. But it wasn't the gunshot that would change everything in the small frontier town. It was the man they claimed had fired it. Blake Turner stood at the bar of the Rusty Nail Saloon, his weathered Stetson pulled low over eyes that hadn't known peaceful sleep in 3 weeks. Once the most respected rancher in the county, now he couldn't order a whiskey without conversations dying and chairs scraping against floorboards as folks moved away. "Your usual, Mr. Turner." The barkeep's voice carried just enough hesitation to sting. Blake nodded, watching as the amber liquid was poured with hands that trembled slightly. "Obliged," he said, voice rough from disuse. 3 weeks since Sheriff Johnson had been found shot dead on the trail to Blake's ranch. 3 weeks since the town had decided Blake Turner had murdered him over a land dispute, despite no trial and precious little evidence. The door to the saloon swung open, bringing with it a gust of desert heat and dust. Blake didn't turn. He'd stopped looking up whenever someone entered a room. The stares burned enough without meeting them head-on. "I'm looking for Mr. Wilkins," came a clear, feminine voice that didn't belong in a place like the Rusty Nail. "I understand he owns this establishment." "That'd be me, madam," replied the barkeep, wiping his hands on his apron. "Hank Wilkins at your service. Though if it's employment you're after, I'm afraid—" "Delia Vaughn," she interrupted, stepping forward. "I've purchased the old Miller property, the Mercantile on Main Street." Blake couldn't help himself. He turned then, curiosity getting the better of him. The woman stood tall and straight-backed, her traveling dress practical but well-made. She wasn't what anyone would call a classic beauty, but there was something striking about her determined chin and the intelligence that sparkled in her hazel eyes. Her chestnut hair was pulled back neatly, though a few rebellious strands had escaped to frame her face. "Miller's been closed for months," Hank said. "Building's not in good shape, Miss Vaughn." "Mrs. Vaughn," she corrected gently, "and I'm aware of its condition. That's why I need good lumber and supplies. I was told you might know who could provide them." Blake drained his whiskey and set the glass down with a deliberate motion. The Mercantile had been closed since old Miller died of pneumonia last winter. Nobody in town had the money or inclination to take it on. A widow, for that's what he assumed she was opening a business alone in Dry Creek, seemed like madness. He turned to leave, uncomfortable with the newcomer who hadn't yet learned to avoid him. As he moved toward the door, his spurs jangling against the wooden floor, she turned. "Excuse me," she called. "Are you by chance familiar with carpentry work?" The saloon went silent. Blake stopped, feeling the weight of every gaze burning into his back. "Madam," Hank said in a stage whisper that carried across the room, "that there's Blake Turner. You don't want to be dealing with him." Blake watched her face, waiting for the inevitable shift, the widening of the eyes, the step backward, the hand flying to the throat in alarm. But Delia Vaughn merely tilted her head slightly. "And why is that, Mr. Wilkins?" she asked, her voice calm. "He killed Sheriff Johnson," someone muttered from a corner table. "Shot him in the back." Blake's jaw tightened. "I didn't kill anyone," he said, the words automatic after 3 weeks of denials that fell on deaf ears. Delia studied him for a long moment, her gaze direct in a way that unnerved him. Then she said something that stunned everyone in the saloon. "I need someone who knows construction and the local suppliers. Are you looking for work, Mr. Turner?" A disbelieving laugh escaped Blake's throat. "Lady, did you hear what they just said about me?" "I heard an accusation," she replied evenly. "I didn't hear any mention of a trial or conviction." The room erupted in mutters and protests. Blake stared at her, trying to determine if she was simple-minded, reckless, or something else entirely. "You're new here," he said finally. "You don't want to start off by associating with me." "I'll decide what I want, Mr. Turner." Her smile was small but determined. "I need the mercantile ready within 2 weeks. I pay fair wages. Are you interested?" Blake felt the stares, heard the murmurs. Something perverse and defiant rose in him. "Yes, madam, I believe I am." The next morning, Blake arrived at the mercantile as the sun was just beginning to crest the distant mountains. He'd half expected Mrs. Vaughn to have reconsidered overnight after someone filled her ear with tales of his supposed crimes. But there she was, unlocking the front door, dressed in a practical work skirt and blouse with her sleeves already rolled up. "Good morning, Mr. Turner," she said brightly. He touched the brim of his hat. "Madam." Inside, the mercantile was in worse shape than he remembered. Dust coated every surface. Mice had made homes in the shelving, and the back wall had severe water damage from a leaking roof. "I can see you're assessing the damage," she said, following his gaze. "Is it salvageable?" Blake nodded slowly. "It'll take work, but yes, roof's the first priority, then the wall. Floor's sturdy enough." "Excellent." She pulled a folded paper from her pocket. "I've made a list of supplies we'll need. Can you add anything I've missed?" He scanned the list, impressed by its thoroughness. "This looks comprehensive, but no one in town will sell to me." "Then we'll go to the next town. There's a settlement 20 miles east, correct?" "Copper Springs," he confirmed. "But Mrs. Vaughn, Delia, please." "Delia," he said, the name feeling foreign on his tongue. "You need to understand what you're doing. This town has made up its mind about me. By hiring me, you're putting yourself on the wrong side of everyone in Dry Creek." She met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Turner, Blake," he corrected if they were to be on first-name terms. "Blake," she said with a nod. "I came west to start fresh. I'm not interested in town gossip or taking sides in matters I know nothing about. I need my store ready and you need work." "The arrangement seems sensible to me." He studied her face, looking for signs of ulterior motives and finding none. "Your husband," he said finally, "is he joining you?" A shadow passed over her features. "My husband died 2 years ago, influenza." "I'm sorry," Blake said, meaning it. "As am I. But life continues, and we must make our way as best we can." She straightened her shoulders. "Now, shall we begin?" They spent that morning clearing out the shop, hauling out broken shelving and sweeping decades of dust. By noon, they'd made visible progress, though the real work of structural repairs hadn't yet begun. When Delia suggested they break for lunch, Blake expected to eat alone behind the building. Instead, she invited him to join her at the small table she'd set up, laying out a simple meal of bread, cheese, and apples. "You're causing quite a stir," he observed, nodding toward the street where passers-by slowed to stare through the open doorway. "Let them stare," she replied with an unconcerned shrug. "Tell me about your ranch, Blake. You are a rancher, aren't you?" He was surprised she knew. "Yes, 300 acres northwest of town, good grazing land." "And you're not there now because—" Blake's jaw tightened. "Because half my hands quit after the rumors started. Can't run cattle with 2 men. Had to sell most of the herd at a loss." She nodded thoughtfully. "And the sheriff, what was the dispute about?" His hand froze halfway to his mouth. "There was no dispute," he said stiffly. "According to the talk in the saloon, Sheriff Johnson wanted my water rights," Blake interrupted. "Said the town needed them. When I refused to sell, he started making trouble impounding my cattle when they strayed, delaying my supply wagons. But I didn't kill him." Delia studied him, her expression giving nothing away. "Then who did?" Blake set down his bread. "If I knew that, I wouldn't be sitting here working for day wages." Something in his tone must have convinced her to change the subject. "Tomorrow we should go to Copper Springs for supplies," she said. "I'll rent a wagon." I have a wagon, Blake replied. It's serviceable. By the end of the week, they had replaced the damaged section of roof, repaired the back wall, and begun installing new shelving. Word had spread quickly about Delia's decision to hire Blake, and the consequences were immediate. Few townsfolk entered the mercantile while he was there, and those who did spoke only to Delia, acting as if Blake were invisible. The first direct confrontation came on Friday afternoon when Mayor Perkins appeared in the doorway, his substantial girth blocking the light. "Mrs. Vaughn," he called, ignoring Blake, who was measuring a section for a new counter. "A word, if you please." Delia descended from a ladder where she'd been hanging new lanterns. "Mayor Perkins, how may I help you?" The mayor glanced distastefully at Blake before returning his attention to Delia. "In private, madam." "Anything you wish to say to me can be said in front of my employee," she replied pleasantly. The mayor's face reddened. "Mrs. Vaughn, you're new to our community, so perhaps you're unaware. This man is under suspicion of murdering an officer of the law." "Suspicion isn't guilt, Mayor Perkins," she said, her tone still cordial but with an undercurrent of steel. "In America, aren't we considered innocent until proven guilty?" "This isn't Boston, Mrs. Vaughn," the mayor replied. "Out here we know what we know. Turner had motive and opportunity. Only reason he wasn't hanged is the new territorial marshal wants a proper investigation." "Then I'll await the findings of that investigation," Delia said firmly. "Now, was there something else you needed? We're quite busy." The mayor's jowls quivered with indignation. "I came to warn you that your association with this man is damaging your standing in the community. Folks won't patronize your store if he's working here." "That would be unfortunate," Delia replied. "For them, primarily, as I intend to stock goods they won't find elsewhere within 50 miles. But I appreciate your concern." After the mayor left, muttering threats about the town council reviewing her business license, Blake stepped down from his work. "You should reconsider," he said quietly. "He's not wrong, they'll boycott your store." Delia shook her head. "They might try. But people need supplies, and once word spreads that I carry quality merchandise at fair prices, pragmatism will win out over principle." "You're more optimistic than me." "Faith, Blake," she said with a small smile. "Not optimism. Faith in people's basic goodness and common sense." He wanted to tell her that his faith in both had been thoroughly destroyed these past weeks, but something in her expression stopped him. Instead, he simply nodded and returned to his work. That Sunday, Blake arrived at the mercantile to find it closed. A note was pinned to the door. "Gone to church. Back at noon. D.V." He hesitated, then turned toward his own cabin on the outskirts of town. He hadn't attended services since the accusations began, unwilling to endure the stares and whispers in God's house. But something about Delia's steadfast faith made him pause. On impulse, he changed direction, heading toward the white clapboard church on the hill. He slipped in after the service had begun, taking a seat in the very back pew. Heads turned, and a ripple of whispers spread through the congregation. Reverend Harris faltered briefly in his reading, but to his credit, continued without comment. Blake spotted Delia's chestnut hair several rows ahead. She turned slightly, as if sensing his presence, and when she saw him, a smile of genuine pleasure lit her face. He nodded once, embarrassed by her obvious delight in his attendance. After the service, Delia made her way to him as congregants filed out, giving them a wide berth. "I'm glad you came," she said simply. "Don't make too much of it," he replied, uncomfortable with her approval. "I never make too much of anything," she said lightly. "Would you like to join me for dinner? I roasted a chicken that's far too large for one person." The invitation surprised him. Working alongside her was one thing, Breaking bread in her home was another level of social connection that would only fuel town gossip. "I don't think that's wise," he began. "Probably not," she agreed cheerfully. "But I find wisdom is often overrated compared to good company." Despite his better judgment, Blake found himself accepting. They walked to the small house she'd rented behind the mercantile, ignoring the stares that followed them. Delia's home was modest but comfortable, with simple furnishings and touches that spoke of the woman herself. Books stacked neatly on a side table, a colorful quilt draped over a chair, wildflowers arranged in a mason jar. "It's not much," she said, watching him take it in, "but it suits me for now." "It's nice," he said honestly. Over dinner, Blake found himself talking more than he had in months. Delia asked about his life before Dry Creek, and he told her about growing up on his father's failing farm in Missouri, heading west at 17 to find his fortune, working cattle drives across Texas before saving enough to buy his own land 10 years ago. "And you?" he asked. "What brings a Boston widow to Arizona territory?" Delia's fingers toyed with her water glass. "After my husband died, I stayed with my sister and her family. They were kind, but—" She paused. "I felt like I was fading away, becoming a ghost in someone else's life. I needed purpose. When I saw the advertisement for the mercantile, something just felt right. It's a hard life out here for a woman alone." "Life is hard everywhere," she replied. "At least here the difficulties are honest ones: heat, dust, physical labor. In Boston, the hardships were veiled behind polite smiles and proper manners." As the evening light faded, Blake rose to leave. At the door, he turned to her. "Thank you," he said, the words inadequate for the simple dignity she'd shown him. "You're welcome anytime, Blake," she replied, and he believed her. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. The mercantile took shape under their hands: new shelving, freshly painted walls, a sturdy counter, and display cases. Delia ordered inventory from suppliers in Tucson and Phoenix, and Blake built her a living area in the back of the store so she could give up the rented house. They fell into an easy rhythm of work and conversation. Blake found himself looking forward to their lunch breaks when Delia would share stories of her life back east or ask thoughtful questions about ranching. He began bringing her wildflowers he found on his morning rides, and she displayed them proudly in the store window. The town's reaction remained divided. Some, like the mayor and his allies, maintained their disapproval. Others, particularly the women who needed the goods Delia would soon provide, began to soften. They would visit when Blake stepped out, asking Delia when she would open and what merchandise she expected. One afternoon, as Blake was installing the final section of shelving, the territorial marshal arrived. Blake recognized him immediately: Lucas Reed, a man with a reputation for thoroughness and fairness. "Turner," Reed said with a nod. "Need a word?" Delia looked up from where she was arranging display items. "You're welcome to use my back office, Marshal," she offered. Reed thanked her, and Blake followed him to the small room behind the main floor. His heart pounded against his ribs. For 3 weeks, he'd been waiting for news of the investigation. "Found something interesting," Reed said without preamble once the door closed behind them. "Johnson's bullet didn't match your gun." Blake stared at him. "What?" "Had the bullet dug out and examined by an expert in Tucson. It's from a Navy Colt. You carry a Remington, right?" "Yes," Blake confirmed, his mind racing. "Always have," Reed nodded. "Also talked to Johnson's deputy. Seems the sheriff was meeting someone the night he died. Wouldn't say who." "You believe me now, that I didn't do it?" "Let's say I'm looking at other possibilities," Reed replied carefully, "including who might have wanted to frame you specifically." The implications hit Blake like a physical blow. "Someone wanted me to hang for this." "Seems that way," Reed agreed. Got enemies, Turner? Blake ran a hand through his hair. None that would go that far, just the usual disputes any rancher has. What about your water rights? Johnson was pushing hard for those, from what I hear. For the town, he claimed, but there's no shortage in town. Their wells are good. Reed's eyes narrowed. Who would benefit most from that water? Blake thought for a moment. The Silver Baron mine opened operations north of here last year. They need water for their processing. Mayor Perkins sits on their board of investors. Interesting, Reed mused. I'll look into that. In the meantime, keep this to yourself. Don't want to tip our hand if someone's still watching. After the marshal left, Blake returned to the main floor in a daze. Delia looked at him questioningly. Good news, she asked quietly. He nodded, unable to find words. When she stepped closer, concern in her eyes, he did something he hadn't planned. He took her hand in his, squeezing it gently. Thank you, he said simply. She didn't ask for what. She just squeezed back, her smile warming him more thoroughly than any Arizona sun. The grand opening of Vaughn's Mercantile was scheduled for Saturday. Delia had distributed handbills throughout town announcing special prices on coffee, sugar, and yard goods for the first day. Blake had worked late the night before, making sure everything was perfect, from the polished counter to the newly painted sign hanging above the door. He arrived early that morning, uncertain what role he would play now that the construction was complete. The job they'd agreed upon was finished. There was no reason for him to stay on. Delia was already there, arranging a display of colorful ribbons in the front window. She wore a blue dress he hadn't seen before, with her hair pinned up in a style more elaborate than her usual practical arrangement. You look nice, he said, the compliment feeling clumsy on his tongue. She turned, a pleased smile brightening her face. Thank you. It seemed like an occasion worth making an effort for. Blake glanced around the store. Need any last-minute help? Always, she replied. Would you mind checking the storeroom? I want to make sure we're organized back there before customers arrive. He spent the next hour arranging crates and barrels in the storeroom, labeling shelves with Delia's neat inventory system. When he emerged, the first customers were already browsing two ranch wives and their children, eyeing the fabric bolts and ready-made clothes with interest. Blake moved to leave, not wanting his presence to drive away business on Delia's important day, but she caught his arm. Stay, she said quietly. I need someone to help with the heavy items and accounts. Delia, you know that's not a good idea. It's the best idea, she countered. You know this inventory as well as I do. Please, Blake. Unable to refuse her, he stayed, keeping to the background as much as possible. To his surprise, the store filled steadily throughout the morning. While some customers looked startled to see him there, most were too interested in Delia's merchandise to make an issue of it. By mid-afternoon, the store had been so busy that neither of them had time for lunch. Blake was helping a rancher load a heavy plow onto his wagon when he spotted a commotion near the saloon. Marshal Reed was leading Mayor Perkins, and another man. Blake recognized him as the foreman from the Silver Baron mine down the street in handcuffs. A crowd quickly gathered, following the procession to the jailhouse. Blake finished securing the plow and hurried back into the mercantile. Something's happening, he told Delia, who was counting change for an elderly customer. As soon as the store emptied, they stepped outside. People were clustering around the jailhouse, voices raised in confusion and disbelief. What's going on? Delia asked a woman passing by. They've arrested the mayor and Jacob Ellis from the mine, she replied excitedly. Something about the sheriff's murder. Blake and Delia exchanged glances. They closed the store and joined the crowd outside the jailhouse. Marshal Reed emerged onto the porch, raising his hands for silence. Folks, "I know there's a lot of confusion right now," he announced. "I'm here to set the record straight. After a thorough investigation, we've determined that Sheriff Johnson was killed by Jacob Ellis, acting on orders from Mayor Perkins. They wanted control of Turner's water rights for the Silver Baron mine operations. When Turner refused to sell, they decided to eliminate him either by hanging for a murder he didn't commit or by forcing him to flee, allowing them to claim his abandoned property. A shocked murmur ran through the crowd. Blake felt Delia's hand slip into his, her fingers warm and steady. "We have signed confessions from both men," Reed continued. "Ellis has admitted to shooting Johnson when the sheriff threatened to expose their scheme. As of this moment, Blake Turner is cleared of all suspicion in this matter." The crowd turned to look at Blake, expressions ranging from shame to disbelief to relief. Reverend Harris was the first to approach him. "Mr. Turner," he said solemnly, "on behalf of many in this town, I owe you an apology. We were too quick to judge without evidence." Others followed, offering awkward words of regret and congratulations. Blake accepted them with quiet dignity, though the wound of their earlier rejection wasn't so easily healed. When the crowd finally dispersed, Delia tugged gently at his hand. "Come on," she said. "I think this calls for a celebration." They returned to the Mercantile, where Delia pulled out a bottle of good whiskey she'd been saving for a special occasion. She poured 2 glasses and handed one to Blake. "To justice," she said, raising her glass. "To faith," he countered, watching her eyes soften at his words. They drank, and Blake felt the weight of the past months beginning to lift. "I should get back to my ranch," he said after a moment. "Start rebuilding what I lost." Delia set down her glass. "Yes, I suppose you should." Something in her tone made him look at her more closely. "Will you be all right here? The store seems to be off to a good start." "Oh, I'll manage," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I always do." Blake realized with sudden clarity that he didn't want to leave her, not just the store, but her company, her quiet strength, her unwavering belief in him when no one else had shown it. "Delia," he began, then stopped, unsure how to proceed. "Yes," she prompted, her eyes meeting his. "I still owe you a week's work," he said finally, "for the storeroom organization and such." Her smile turned genuine. "Well, I wouldn't want to cheat you out of your wages. And after that," he continued, emboldened by her response, "maybe we could discuss a more permanent arrangement." "What kind of arrangement did you have in mind, Mr. Turner?" she asked, a hint of teasing in her voice. Blake took a step closer to her. "The kind where I don't have to say goodbye to you at the end of each day." Delia's cheeks flushed pink. "That's quite an arrangement to propose to a business associate." "You've been more than that to me," he said quietly. "You saw me when no one else would look. You believed in me when everyone else had condemned me. You gave me back my reputation, my dignity with nothing but a smile and your faith." "I only treated you as any person deserves to be treated," she replied, though her voice trembled slightly. "No," Blake shook his head. "You did far more than that. You restored my faith in others, in myself, in possibilities I'd stopped believing in." He reached out slowly, giving her time to step away if she wished. When she didn't move, he gently touched her cheek. "I'm not a man of fancy words, Delia, but I think I'm falling in love with you." Tears brightened her eyes. "Even though I'm stubborn and too outspoken for a proper lady." "Because of those things," he smiled, "and 100 others." Delia covered his hand with her own. "Then we have a problem, Blake Turner." "What's that?" "I've already fallen in love with you," she whispered. "Quite thoroughly, in fact." Blake felt something break open inside him, a happiness so intense it bordered on pain. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and kissed her. Her lips were soft and tasted faintly of whiskey, and something sweeter that was uniquely Delia. When she wrapped her arms around his neck, responding with unexpected passion, Blake knew he was truly home for the first time in his life. In the weeks that followed, Blake divided his time between restoring his ranch and helping Delia with the mercantile. Word of his innocence spread quickly, and most of his former hands returned, apologetic but eager for work. The town's attitude toward him transformed almost overnight. Suddenly, he was a wronged man, a victim of corruption rather than a villain. He found the about-face almost as difficult to accept as their earlier condemnation. Only with Delia could he express his lingering anger and hurt. "They turned on me so easily," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch behind her store. "How do I forgive that?" "One day at a time," she replied, her head resting against his shoulder. "Not for their sake, but for yours. Bitterness is a poison that hurts the vessel that holds it." "You sound like Reverend Harris," he teased gently. "Worse things to sound like," she smiled up at him. "Besides, not everyone abandoned you. Marshall Reed believed in the truth enough to find it." "And you believed in me," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Without evidence, without knowing me, you just decided to trust me." "I looked in your eyes," she said simply. "I saw an honest man." As summer gave way to fall, Blake's ranch prospered. With his reputation restored, he secured a contract to supply beef to the cavalry post 60 miles south. The mercantile flourished as well, becoming a center of commerce for Dry Creek and surrounding ranches. Blake and Delia continued their courtship with a proper formality in public that dissolved into tender intimacy in private. They attended church together each Sunday, shared meals, and talked long into the evening about their hopes and plans. On a crisp October evening, Blake led Delia up to his favorite spot on his property, a small mesa overlooking the valley, where the sunset painted the landscape in brilliant oranges and reds. "I have something to show you," he said, helping her down from her horse. "It's beautiful here," she breathed, taking in the panoramic view. "I thought we might build a house here," Blake said, watching her face closely. "Our house." Delia turned to him, her eyes wide. "Our house." Blake took her hands in his. "Delia Vaughn, you brought light back into my life when I was living in darkness. You believed in me when I'd lost belief in myself. I love you more than I ever thought possible, and if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you've made me." Tears shimmered in her eyes as she smiled up at him. "Are you asking me to marry you, Blake Turner?" "I am," he confirmed, dropping to one knee. "With all my heart." "Yes," she whispered, then laughed through her tears. "Yes, of course, yes." They were married in the white church on the hill, the first Sunday of November. The entire town turned out for the ceremony, partly from genuine goodwill, and partly from curiosity about the unlikely couple who had overcome so much adversity. Delia wore a gown of ivory silk ordered specially from Tucson, with a crown of autumn flowers in her hair. Blake, uncomfortable in his new suit, forgot his discomfort the moment he saw her walking toward him on Reverend Harris's arm. "She looks like an angel," whispered Tom, Blake's ranch foreman and best man. "She is one," Blake replied with absolute conviction. Their vows were simple and heartfelt. When Reverend Harris pronounced them husband and wife, the cheers that erupted inside the church could be heard all the way to the mercantile. The reception was held in the town square, with tables laden with food contributed by every household in Dry Creek. Even Mayor Perkins' wife attended, though her husband remained in territorial prison awaiting trial. As evening fell, lanterns were lit and a fiddler struck up a lively tune. Blake led Delia onto the makeshift dance floor for their first dance as husband and wife. "Are you happy, Mrs. Turner?" he asked, holding her close as they swayed to the music. Incredibly, she replied, her eyes shining. And you, more than I ever imagined possible. He twirled her gently, admiring how the lantern light caught the highlights in her hair. You know, when you first walked into the rusty nail that day, I thought you were either crazy or reckless. And now, she laughed. Now I think you were sent to me, he said seriously. A blessing I didn't deserve but desperately needed. We were sent to each other, she corrected, rising on tiptoe to kiss him lightly. And we both deserved happiness. As the celebration continued around them, Blake held his wife close, marveling at how a single moment a stranger's choice to see him as a man worthy of trust had changed everything. His reputation, once shattered beyond repair, had been rebuilt by her smile and faith, stronger than before because it now included love. Their new home was completed by spring, a spacious ranch house overlooking the valley just where Blake had proposed. Delia continued to run the mercantile 3 days a week, with a hired girl helping on the other days. Blake's cattle operation expanded, and by the following year, the Turner Ranch was known as one of the most successful in the territory. In the summer of 1880, Delia gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Grace, for the blessing she represented in their lives. Blake, who had once believed his life effectively over, found himself embracing fatherhood with the same passion he brought to everything he loved. She has your eyes, he told Delia as they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset while their infant daughter slept in Delia's arms. And your stubborn chin, Delia replied with a fond smile. Heaven help us when she gets older. Blake laughed, wrapping an arm around his wife's shoulders. I was thinking we might expand the house next year, add another bedroom or two. Delia raised an eyebrow. Planning ahead, Mr. Turner. Just being practical, Mrs. Turner, he replied innocently. A family needs room to grow. Indeed it does, she agreed, leaning against him. And I have a feeling ours will do just that. As darkness fell over the ranch and the first stars appeared in the vast Arizona sky, Blake Turner counted his blessings: a thriving business, a beautiful home, a loving wife, a healthy child. All things that would have seemed impossible in those dark days when he stood alone against the world's judgment. What are you thinking about? Delia asked softly, noticing his contemplative mood. About faith, he replied. How yours never wavered, even when faced with everyone else's doubt. How it gave me back my own. Faith sees possibilities where others see only problems, she said, shifting their sleeping daughter to her other arm. It's a choice we make every day. The best choice I ever made was believing in you, Blake said, pressing a kiss to her temple. Even when it seemed foolish. And the best choice I ever made was walking into that saloon and hiring the most notorious man in town, she teased gently. They sat together in comfortable silence as night settled fully around them, the peaceful darkness broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the soft breathing of their child. From notorious outcast to respected rancher and family man, Blake's journey had been one of redemption, made possible by a woman whose faith had been strong enough for both of them, until he found his own again. In the years that followed, when newcomers to Dry Creek heard the story of Blake Turner, how his reputation had been destroyed by lies and rebuilt by love, they would look at the prosperous rancher with new respect. And when they met Delia Turner, with her kind smile and quiet strength, they understood how a single person's belief could change not just one life, but an entire community. For in choosing to see the good in a man when everyone else saw only guilt, Delia had reminded them all of the power of faith and the healing miracle of love, lessons that the wild Arizona frontier, for all its harshness, could teach those with hearts open enough to learn.